When you see a Bernd and Hilla Becher photograph, you often see it in grid form, 4 or 9, 15, 24, or even 30 examples. And when you look at them together, these grids are generally of the same type of form, and it allows you to get lost within the system. They created a kind of factory of images, and they found a way to take something that's enormous and photograph it so that we can see the poetics of each form. It's a great pleasure to present the first retrospective of the Bechers' work in the United States since their passing. The last one was in 1974, when they had only completed the first 15 years of their work, and the Bechers worked for 3 decades thereafter. We're showing works from private and public collections, many of which have never been seen before. We've also been able to work within the artist's archive in Cologne to show their preparatory materials, as well as their early works both before their partnership began in 1959 and soon thereafter. Bernd and Hilla Becher were 2 artists from Germany who worked together as an artist couple from the 1960s until the 2000s. They developed a very distinctive style of picture making, but they are also known for a particular subject, industrial architecture. Water towers, steel factories, winding towers above coal mines, buildings that are everywhere, but are generally not part of the discussion of the built environment. They photographed these buildings exclusively in black and white, and they used a kind of Linnaean system for visual arts, the same system that would be used by a botanist or a zoologist to compare examples.
The Bechers were not nostalgic about industry. They were in love with the production of these buildings that solve a working problem. They were just as aware of how science investigates the world as they were aware of how photography investigates the world. And in a certain sense, they blended a scientific strategy onto visual culture and visual art. One of the most exciting sets of pictures for most viewers are framework houses, which were among the first subjects that the Bechers photographed. They're almost all photographed frontally, so they are portraits of the house form. And you can imagine them being a portrait of the individual who, let's say, lives in that house or families that live in that house. They're half timbered, and there is all sorts of regulations in Germany as to how much wood could be used in any house. So that created an interesting architectural problem that defines this area. When Bernd and Hilla started working together, they began this extended series, which they photographed really from 1959, which is their first year of their partnership, until they produced a book, which didn't come out until 1977. So it has a long duration. But what's great about them is that they reveal that the decoration is not really ornamental. It is structural. It's like an X-ray portrait of the building. I particularly like these because we can see them sorting out the problem of making a picture that could be used in a comparative way.
Max, I'm sure you know this better than I, but this district of Siegen is known for these framework houses, and it was where Bernd grew up. And this is the project that they began with in a certain sense.
And the interesting thing about these, let's say from an architecture standpoint, is that they are so to say self-made architecture, right? It's not really kind of very design. Right. On the one hand, they kind of developed a first typology, but then they showed the individualism of each of these facades.
And even their typological approach allows us to see how the individual fits into the society of buildings, and even seeing these as faces, as actual portraits of buildings.
You then start to see all the idiosyncrasies of each individual house. I mean, just look at how the windows are sometimes placed or misplaced.
This idea of photography, which is, it's about paying attention. It's about the poetics of seeing itself.
Hilla was born in Potsdam, and she really was the photographer at the beginning of their partnership. She was particularly good at the most exacting scientific aspects of the medium of photography. She saw the sculptural value of the materials that she was working with, and that's revealed quite effectively in this study of technical details and other metal forms. Bernd Becher was born in the Siegen district in Germany, which is a coal mining area, and he was very interested in everything from book illustration to typography to painting. He was fascinated by these large industrial forms that defined the landscape surrounding him. He was a very good draftsman, and I think our visitors will be delighted to see how good he was at describing mining apparatus and how hard it must have been to effectively render these complex, enormous forms. He learned quickly on that he could duplicate, in a certain sense, what he saw with his eye and tried to record with his hand with the camera. At first, he started with small format cameras, where he had to collage them together. And then, with Hilla's help, he was able to photograph them in the partnership so that he could reveal what he found so stimulating visually and aesthetically.
Working in the archive, we got to see some of the early work of Hilla's, studies of metal forms. She was fascinated by how light and metal reacted in this very dramatic way. Mm-hmm. She really was originally the photographer of the two. He was the painter and draftsman. And we couldn't understand that development until we went into the archive.
It's so fascinating to see that.
Yeah.
You also see, on the other hand, also where he's coming from, of course, from German Neue Sachlichkeit, new objectivity, and then kind of translating that into a new, not only medium, but almost like in a rigorous artistic discipline.
And even over here, we can see some of his early lithographs and drawings, and he was fascinated by, as you say, Neue Sachlichkeit, that idea of precision of description. And it carries with them through the rest of their career.
One of the great revelations for me was actually this collage, which I've never seen before. It's just absolutely amazing. Yeah.
It's the first time it's being put on the wall, and
you really excavated everything.
We have beautiful casework of albums and notebooks where they're collecting forms. You can see them developing their ideas. And the exhibition rewards the close attention. As you say, the closer you get, the more you see.
And it's so fascinating what you have done here, because it basically, the Bechers are of course influential for many things, but especially also for their systematic, analytical approach. And that becomes even more obvious through this show, have access to their early notebooks.
One of the things that happened in the late 50s and 60s was a change in the relationship between all industrialized Western countries and the coal mining and steel industry. And this impacted the Bechers' aesthetic and professional choices as artists. They were well aware that the Industrial Revolution was ending in a certain sense, that what had begun hundreds of years earlier was becoming obsolete. And rather than photograph ruins after these buildings were no longer operational, they made an effort together to record these things while they were still operational as working examples of human activity. And so what kept them as active, literally they tried to work every day if possible, was this sense that if they missed an opportunity, they would never be able to revisit it. And that is something that is kind of remarkable about their work. It gave them energy and a feeling of responsibility. In a certain sense, one could say that the Bechers were portraitists. Most of the time, the Bechers' documentation were of isolated structures. And it was not easy for them to photograph isolated structures because these factories were enormous and everything was connected to everything else. But from the very beginning, they made photographs like this one of a Welsh power station with 4 cooling towers, which looked to me more like 19th century landscape photography. Yet they didn't show them. They made them for their own purposes. In this example, you can see that we're from an elevated vantage point. We're looking kind of like a drone would on the scene. It's always important to ask, always in photography, but particularly in the Bechers, where is the camera? Part of their mastery of the medium is understanding this effect. One of the many things I learned from working with the archive of the Bechers on this exhibition was how important their physical location of their home was to the nature of their work. They lived near Dusseldorf, where Bernd taught, and also very near Cologne. This was the region with all this mining and steel production in Germany. Within a few miles of their home was this mine, the Concordia Mine. It is a massive facility. And starting in 1967, they drove the 12 miles over many, many, many years and produced a complete survey of the buildings in this mine. In this case, it's the family of forms, the family of sculptures that have to be built by the mining engineers to cool the water, to extract the ore, and to create the steel. And what's amazing is that we'll be able to walk into one room in the exhibition and to see the entire story of an industry.
And this picture is an overview from an elevated perspective, and it gives us the context that we don't always see in their individual, more sculptural photographs. And if you look at it, we have individual buildings, machine halls, cooling towers, smokestacks, all sorts of different types of buildings. What they were interested in is not just photographing single elements, but to photographing them in context. It took them years to do this. It's a vast factory, and this room is an exploration of the whole, not just the parts. And if we turn the corner right here, we can see a very, very interesting shape on the wall. This is what they called a star. It's a single subject. This is a winding tower to extract ore from the ground, but photographed in the round. It was very interesting that they could circumnavigate this building, and they created a new kind of pictorial structure to present it to the public.
This is one of the special parts of the exhibition, to me, and I hope for all of our visitors, where we see the evolution of the typology form come alive. It is covering just a few years from the mid-1960s to the mid-1980s, when they took these individual pictures and they made different visual arrangements. This allows you to see the individual and the family. It's very sociological. The biggest tension in all of our lives are how are we an individual and how are we part of a family or a society? How are we different from our parents and different from our siblings and different from our neighbors? If you're willing to look in this particular gallery at the tools that they use to explore those differences, you will have seen something that really has never been presented before, which is the evolution of their understanding of their typological methods. The Bechers were interested in sculpture as a medium. They were able to see the built environment, the forms of industry, as another aspect of anonymous sculptural form. They were beloved by the conceptual sculptors like Carl Andre and Saul LeWitt. They were seen as fellow travelers. They were recognized as artists working with the camera, not particularly interested in photography per se, but interested in the vernacular language of the built environment, the sculptural form of industry, and how these ideas come together in their work in the development of the typology.
The Bechers developed their ideas in tandem with these minimalist sculptors, and this exhibition really is the first to put them into that context.
Still at that time, photographers were probably not even that accepted as, so to say,
they were quite
on the
segregated.
same level artists. And then it seems that also other artists strongly collected their work, right?
Yes.
And so there has been a lot of exchange also on that level.
Yes, and in fact, the Met benefited from working with the LeWitt family to bring works that were exchanged by Saul LeWitt and the Bechers, and we have many of those in the exhibition. And if you just look at the space, you can see how these industrial forms were used by Carl Andre and even Saul LeWitt, and they make this beautiful association, and I'm very, very proud that the visitors will be able to see their work in the context of how the Bechers emerged in the 60s and 70s.
And in these galleries, it really works so powerfully that you have a certain intimacy, intensity of the work, and these dialogues and juxtapositions. On a personal level, what's interesting for me, of course, about this show is that Bernd Becher was a professor at the Kunstakademie in Düsseldorf, exactly at the time where my father was a professor at the Kunstakademie in Düsseldorf for architecture.
Yeah.
And basically, of course, there was a strong dialogue in the sense that basically they saw the important sculptural quality of architecture and the architectural power of even what was considered anonymous architecture. In a sense, for an architect like my father, That was, of course, extremely important and another important dialogue that happened back then.
People don't realize that in 1970, the Bechers published their first monograph. It was called Anonymous Sculpture, and that's how they saw the world. And this typology right here was the first acquisition the Met made of the Bechers' work. It's a 16-part water tower typology, and we acquired it in 1980. It was only one of the first works of contemporary art the Met acquired.
It's amazing.
Among the more exciting forms that the Bechers photographed were water towers. These are vessels for the storage of water, either for cities or for industry itself. And in this 16-part typology, we see all different types of water towers. Some of them look like they're designed by extraterrestrial travelers. Others look like ballistic missiles, and some don't look like they could stand on their own, like the bottom row, third from the left tower, which is one of my favorites.
It turns out that gravel as an industrial material is used in many things. It's a standard building material. You need gravel, but it's really important in the construction of roads. The creation of gravel as an industrial material is part of the story of modern Germany. And these buildings just blow my mind. They just delight my eye. It's very much a part of the Bechers' ideology to find different building types and to continue to develop their ideas. And here we see a beautiful group that is put together in a very harmonic way. And the idea that the Bechers could take something so humble and so simple and something so disregarded and underappreciated and show the sculptural value and the poetry of these buildings is a tribute to their achievement.
Gas tanks were critical to the Bechers' body of work, and these really are universal. You can find them around the world. This typology of gas tanks, it's in the Met's collection. They're all different types of gas tanks. Some have a fixed shape, some have this expanding and contracting. And what I really, really like about this particular typology of gas tanks is that it's very instructive for how they put together all of their typologies, whether they were of like forms or unlike forms. Some they needed full, some they needed half full, some they needed half empty or a third empty. And they're put together with a lot of care so that the eye never rests and never tires of looking at it. And that's part of their art.
Max, this is our biggest gallery in the exhibition. It's the crescendo of the presentation, and these are all large typologies. It took them years to get enough pictures to put their story on the wall in a certain sense, which sort of comes to its logical conclusion at a series of 30 pictures of blast furnaces, which are the largest buildings in steel production, and it will engulf us. Look at the scale of this. It's 12 feet wide, and I just find it fascinating. And they're portraits.
So they are coming from
all
different
over.
areas. So
all
basically
over. It's like
kind
8 different countries.
A global view of industrialization and kind of the survival of monuments of that.
Yeah.
Not only following a certain systematic approach, but actually also really investing so much effort and time to find the perfect shot and also the perfect setting for that is something that basically probably they taught the students also a level of patience, a level of approach, a level of preparation that is very unique. Yeah.
Also, I think the Bechers had a real atelier relationship to their students. You weren't just taking a course with them. You were part of their world. They taught by example.
Yeah.
And it comes out through their work.
Notice that we're not standing on the ground. We're way up high in this super big plant to be able to look across evenly at these forms. This form, more than any other, is the symbol of steel industry. They're unbelievably dangerous. To get permission to photograph these furnaces took a lot of work over years and years. But these pictures are the symbol of an entire industry, which is undergoing great change, then and now. At a time today when we're considering how energy is distributed globally and locally, the industrial technologies that are being presented as art in this exhibition should provide some interesting dialogue. The Bechers were not interested in the politics of mineral extraction, iron ore extraction, coal extraction. but they recognized that this was the end of the Industrial Revolution as we know it. I really believe that seeing is a creative act, and the Bechers found a way to explore something that was so present in all of our lives and yet so hidden. I think that their appreciation of the built environment and the way they organized their pictures into typologies was innovative. But what I believe will keep this exhibition and the artist's work alive today and what's relevant is what we will take away and look at our world and how we can collect from the built environment what's meaningful to us. This is what was meaningful to the Bechers. The question I have is what's meaningful to us today. So it's a challenge for us to open our eyes and to leave the museum with our eyes wide open.
That the Bechers found inspiration in the industrial vernacular is so profound to me. The things that are truly neglected, that are the epitome, the high point of industrial culture, that are simply not seen, that are invisible, that we generally don't look at or look away from, and they made beautiful. Inspiration comes for every artist in a different way, but for the Bechers, it was here.
A project like this one requires an incredible effort across all fronts. And on behalf of the Met and our frequent exhibition partner, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, I'd like to thank the many friends and colleagues involved, including all of the private and institutional lenders to the exhibition, for sharing their treasures with the general public. Working on this exhibition through the difficulties imposed by the pandemic has been extremely challenging for the teams in Cologne, in New York, and in San Francisco. A special thanks goes out to all those individuals who assisted us on this project, and especially to Jeff Rosenheim, Joyce Frank Menschel Curator in charge of the Department of Photographs, for moving this project ever forward when it must have seemed nearly impossible. At the Met, we are grateful to our incredible donors who have made this exhibition possible, including Joyce Frank Menschel, the Barry A. and Dee Dee Wigmore Foundation, the Edward John and Patricia Rosenwald Foundation, and Linda Macklow. Finally, we extend our gratitude to the Mary C. and James W. Fosberg Publications Fund and the Mellon Foundation, who helped bring the exhibition's wonderful catalog to life.